Good afternoon, East Coast, and good morning, West and Pacific. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Jen Reed with the Science Collaborative. I'm joined today by my colleagues Lynn Vaccaro and Nick Soberall. You can't see him right at the moment, as well as our NOAA Program Officer, Doug George, and our partners at the Centralized Data Management Office. You're going to hear from a few of us today. So quick note, we are recording this webinar, and after we've completed today, we'll have a recording posted, and we'll be able to add in all of the questions that we received today to our running Q&A document for the RFP. So shortly, I can't promise that the questions will be added today, but in the next day or so, that running document will be updated with today's questions. And those are both going to be on the funding opportunity page on our website. Just a couple of things here before we dive in. Please keep yourself muted during the initial presentation. I think everyone entered in mute mode anyway, so if you could just stay there, that would be great. We'll be using the question function on the GoToWebinar console. You can enter your questions as they occur throughout the webinar. And the bulk of what we're planning to do today is have an opportunity for you just to ask your questions. We do have a few slides of kind of background material that we think is important for everyone to hear, but then we'll be spending most of the time with questions. And as I said, please try or not try, but please enter those through the GoToWebinar console. So let's look at what we're planning to do today. If we flip to the outline, we're going to walk through the collaborative research opportunity. So this is one of two RFPs that we have open currently, and the webinar today will only focus on the collaborative research opportunity. We'll talk about the timeline for that opportunity, key requirements, and review criteria. We also think it's helpful to hear about the kinds of projects that this RFP is designed to support. So Lynn's going to offer some examples from prior competitions to give a flavor of the kinds of things we support. This intro should take about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll respond to your questions. So as I mentioned, we do have one other RFP that's open, it's the Science Transfer RFP. If you were looking for input or opportunity to ask questions for that particular RFP, we will be having a webinar for that in January, and you can register for that transfer grant website, and you can check out the running Q&A list there and connect with us before the webinar if you have questions that are immediate. But today we're focusing on collaborative research. Hand it off to our background material. Lynn?
Sounds great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Lynn Vaccaro with the Science Collaborative, as Jen said. And we wanted to just start by getting a sense for who's in the audience here today, just so we know who we're talking to. So you'll see a poll open up on your screen. The first question is just about your affiliation. And you can actually check more than one if that's most appropriate for you. All right, looks like we've got, I can see some early results here. It looks like we've got a lot of folks from different academic institutions, about 2/3, about a quarter are from the reserve system. Do you want to share the results, Nick? About a quarter, or almost a third from the reserve system, and then a few government and NGO folks and a few others. Okay, that's helpful. And there'll probably be a little bit of, kind of redundant material for, depending on what audience you're coming from. And we've got one more question just about whether or not you've applied to one of our opportunities before. right, looks like the majority, 70% or so, have not applied to our programs before, but almost a quarter have. Okay, so there'll be a little bit of, like I said, a little bit of repeat material, but it's nice to know that there's some new folks in the group. So welcome. Thanks for your interest in our grant opportunities. So I'm going to do a little introduction here to these collaborative research grants, just to sort of lay out kind of our philosophy and our expectations for projects that we fund through this program. Probably about 15 minutes of introduction, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. So the Collaborative Research Grant Program is the largest opportunity that we offer here at the Science Collaborative. Awards are up to $600,000 for projects that last up to 3 years. And as you hopefully inferred from looking at the RFP, there is a pre-proposal and a full proposal stage to the application process. Pre-proposals are due in December, and then you have to be invited to submit a full proposal. And then those full proposals will be due in mid-April. And we hope to make funding notifications in July with the expectation that projects should be ready to start October 1. And I guess just one other note that, you know, during the last competition, we invited just about a third of folks to the full proposal stage. So just to give you a sense there, we do try to limit the number of folks submitting full proposals because we know it's a big investment of time at that next stage. So what is collaborative research? Here's just a simple definition. So we see collaborative research projects as projects where researchers and the intended users of the research are working together to advance knowledge and understanding through applied research in a way that none of them could do just by working alone. And so we hope that gives you just a real kind of simple explanation for what we're trying to do here. And, you know, we really believe that by using a collaborative process and through an end user driven process, that in the end, those projects will produce good science that is ultimately more relevant and more useful and more impactful. Just a little bit more about what that looks like for our program in particular. You know, these projects start with reserve management needs, so needs that were identified by folks within the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. And those management needs line up with our focus areas that are listed there in blue. And then those projects are driven by a collaboration that involves, at a minimum, folks from the reserve system, additional users from within and outside the reserve system, researchers from different disciplines that are relevant to the project. And then typically there's a collaborative lead who helps facilitate and pull it all together and ensure that the engagement and collaborative processes work. And at the end of the day, we hope that these projects lead to data, tools, and products that will inform decisions related to that management need that was the initial impetus for the project. And just a couple kind of quick notes about this, and we definitely see this program as being very relevant for both natural science topics as well as social science topics. And we do build our review panels with the expectation that we'll get some social science proposals. So do please submit those project ideas. And I guess the second thing to just put out there is that there's lots of different flavors and styles and philosophies and frameworks and things for collaborative science. Different terms, you know, you might have heard of community-based research, participatory action research, joint fact-finding. And I guess we hope that this program is not favoring or excluding any of those maybe more specific frameworks. At the end of the day, what's really important, right, is that there's a plan that makes sense, that provides input at the right time and the right way, that allows that project at the end of the day to produce results that are really relevant and targeted for their intended use. So that's just a little background there, kind of laying out what we want to do with these grants. Now I'm going to just walk through 3 of the key required elements in just a little bit more detail. So hopefully it is clear, just looking at the RFP, that all of the projects that we support here at the Science Collaborative have to be tied to the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. So it means that we need to have a partner from within the reserve system on their proposal, and we really encourage you to collaborate really closely on that proposal. In particular, you really want to make sure that you're co-developing the sections of your proposal that do lay out your justification for the work, the relevance to the reserve system, and of course that you've got close collaboration on any sections that explain what the reserve role is going to be in the project. during the project or after the project is wrapped up. The second thing we wanted to just point out is that there is a document that's referenced in the RFP that we encourage you to also review and reference. Annual Summary of Reserve Management Needs. And this is a document that NOAA pulls together each year. It's long, but it is updated every year. And it's intended to be a reference specifically for this RFP to help put out there what are some of the current needs from within the reserve system. And there may be other documents that you might want to reference in your proposal that could also justify, the need for your work, whether they're needs assessments, other strategic planning documents, the management plans for specific reserves could also be relevant to really show how your work fits in and connects to the reserve system. And then the second thing I wanted to point out is that you'll see in the RFP reference to these proposal assessment forms that reserve managers complete. So I just wanted to briefly explain how that works. So after proposals are submitted to us, we get in touch with all of the reserve managers and give them a list of the proposals that identify their reserve as a partner on that proposal. And we just want to make sure that the reserve managers are aware of and supportive of those projects. And if for any reason they do have any concerns, they do have a way to share those concerns directly with us. So they have the option to complete this proposal assessment form, and in particular, tell us if they've got any concerns with the level of engagement of the staff in the proposal development process, or with the proposed role for the reserve system partner, including the budget and the way that the reserve would be contributing to that project. And those, you as an applicant don't need to worry about those proposal assessment forms. We handle those. We'll do any hounding and reminders that are needed. But it is your responsibility as an applicant to make sure that the reserve manager is fully aware of and supportive of your work, and of course to provide a copy of your pre-proposal, as soon as it's submitted. And of course, in advance to help make sure that you've kind of nailed it and everybody's needs are met with that proposal. So the second really important element for these projects are the collaboration and end user engagement part. We just a note here that, looking back at reviewer comments from prior RFPs, this is really an element that our review panel takes seriously, and it's oftentimes the thing that makes or breaks proposals. I just wanted to point out just a couple things that I think could be useful to you as you try to demonstrate really meaningful end user engagement in your proposals and as you're really designing your project. The first is to be really specific about who your intended users are and their needs. It's not just coastal managers, but hopefully it's a specific agency, perhaps a specific office within that agency that needs some piece of information, perhaps to inform permitting for shorelines or something like that. The second thing is that we do ask for at least one letter of support from an end user with your pre-proposal. It's actually a new requirement this year. So at least one and no more than 3. So put some bounds on it. And that is an important way for those users to demonstrate in their words their interest in the proposal and their commitment to being involved, at least in some way, if the project moves forward. The second thing is, in your narrative, think about when and why you're going to be getting end user input and how that will shape the research process. And it's helpful to be really specific about what research decisions have already been influenced by user input, as you were developing the pre-proposal, and where that input will be really helpful during the project. What decisions do you need their input for? And that really shows that you're planning a project that will be responsive. And then our opportunities do require you to include a collaborative lead on your proposal, and we'd be happy to answer questions about that in more detail. But just a word about that it's really important to demonstrate that your collaborative lead has enough time and support to do their work. It's not easy, it can be really time consuming to do all the coordination, the engagement, identifying the right people, getting them to the table. And of course we as a program really value that. So make sure that you're also giving them the right support that they need to do their job well. And then show in the proposal, whether it's in the resumes or in your team section, that person you've identified as your collaborative lead has the right skills to do so. And there's no particular credentials, required for this position, but you do want to show that they've got some experience doing something similar, and they've got an interest in doing this type of work. And then the last tip I'll offer here about collaboration is to really explain in your proposal how the project results could be used in as much detail as you can. What exactly will be done with the results at the end of the day. And one way to do that we've seen work well is to offer examples. I mean, you may not know exactly how everything's going to play out in your project. You're hopefully leaving some room for flexibility and responsiveness during the project period itself. But you can still offer some examples of the types of findings that could emerge, the way they might be summarized into different products, and then who might pick those up and how, and in what situations would they consult these references that you're developing as a result of this project. And that really shows that you understand, all of those different steps and how it's going to actually play into, the management and decision-making sphere, whatever that sphere might be for your particular topic and project. And then the last required element that we'll mention here today is data sharing. And as with all federally funded research, our grant recipients are also expected to comply with federal data sharing expectations, which means that you've got to make all data that's collected or created within this grant or through this grant, that data is made accessible and discoverable in a timely manner. So if you're invited to submit a full proposal, you will need to develop and submit a full data sharing plan as an appendix, and you're welcome to look at what that looks like, the template that we expect at the full proposal stage that's on our grant page now. But at the pre-proposal stage, it's really just about making sure that you're planning your budget and your team accordingly, that you've got enough resources to be able to do the data management work if you move forward with your project idea. And a rough rule of thumb that we offer is that projects should be budgeting about 10 to 15% of their budget towards just the data management side. And of course, that includes all the data wrangling and organizing and processing and documenting, the metadata side, such that you can make all of that data available and accessible at the end of your project period. And then they're, thinking about what your data sharing portal might look like. Most of these don't have any fees associated with them, but for some types of data, for example, I know remote sensing data, sometimes there are some fees associated with using some different data sharing portals. So just thinking that through. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention here on this slide is one of the bullets there in that list, the Centralized Data Management Office is a close partner of the program and of the reserve system, and they are available to provide both consulting and advice for applicants and teams that are funded. And they can also provide some long-term data archival and data access services for projects. And that's actually a role that they provide already for a lot of NERRS long-term monitoring data. All right, and then just briefly, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the pre-proposal evaluation process. And the RFP lays out the evaluation criteria in quite a bit of detail. And then that little sticky note reminder there for me is also to just point out that there is a reference as well that's online on the grant page that also goes into a little bit more detail about what the review process looks like and who the reviewers are. So consult those if you're interested in the details, but there's just a couple points I wanted to make here today. One is, of course, as you're writing it, it's helpful to think about who your reviewers are going to be for the pre-proposal. So our pre-proposals are reviewed by 3 members of our review panel, and we intentionally recruit really diverse people to serve on that panel. So these are folks that have expertise in, natural and social sciences, collaborative processes, so they really think hard about that research to application process and how to do that well, and coastal management, whether they're practitioners or maybe researchers, but really working in that applied coastal management space. And those reviewers may or may not be fully familiar with the reserve system or your specific discipline or specific location. So of course, err on the side of providing some extra background in your pre-proposal. And then the second thing to just point out too is that at the pre-proposal stage, applicants are really encouraged to focus on the management relevance, the collaborative approach, and the potential application of your work. And then just enough of the methodological detail to demonstrate that your outputs are feasible and that they will be scientifically sound at the end of the day. This is really a chance for you to kind of sell your idea and really show its connection to the management realm. And then the full proposal is the time to go into more detail about your specific methods and your specific collaborative approach. So I think that's all I'm going to say there. Happy to field questions if there's more questions about that. And then the last thing here that I'd like to do is to just walk you through just 2 example projects that I think can bring home, sort of make some of this a little bit more concrete for a specific example. So this first one is based in Cape Cod, involves researchers from Stonehill College and from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And this project actually hasn't fully wrapped up yet, but it's a really nice example of a project that's answering a really important, useful question, but using these very cutting-edge methods. So both the science and the management are really exciting about this project. So the management need is that these towns along Cape Cod are really struggling with excess nitrogen in their coastal waters, and they're facing increasing regulatory pressure to do something about it. And a lot of the towns want to use oyster culturing operations as part of their plan, part of their mitigation plan. But it's not always clear what sort of estimates they can make about the potential for that method to improve, nitrogen levels in the water. So the team has been conducting a series of experiments with 3 different culturing practices that are in use in the area, and trying to quantify the nitrogen removal, both the processes as well as the total amount. So the users for this project are the towns that are adjacent there. In fact, there's members of the town on the project team who are actually doing a lot of the setup and the maintenance for the culturing operations that are being studied through the project. There's a planning commission, and then there's members of the state who are involved in the regulatory process for water quality. And then the reserve is intimately involved here. They are the collaborative lead for the project, and the education coordinator is also involved, developing some signage and some curriculum as well that goes along with the project. And their collaborative approach is very, very efficient and targeted, I would say. As I said, there are members of the town that are on the team who are responsible for some of the field work. There is an advisory team as well that's been advising the project. And then there's quite a few direct consultations happening, and that's the stage they're in right now. So it's what I'm hearing about as one of their program officers here, talking to, they're developing a brochure that will be given out with everybody who's requesting a permit to do oyster culturing, that'll explain some of these best practices. So they're working closely with the town shellfish constable to develop that brochure. They're trying to get their results into an existing web resource, technology matrix they call it. So they're working really closely right now with the Cape Cod Commission to make sure that they've got their results summarized in a way that it can feed directly into this existing kind of web tool. And then, Twana Marie is terrific. She's also talking a lot about kind of sort of socializing folks to the findings. So kind of smaller meetings to explain the findings ahead of their final workshop that's being planned for December. So hopefully that gives you a sense for what one project looks like, how they define their users, what they're doing for their collaborative approach. And I'd like to offer just one other example that's we're also really excited about here and have talked about a few times, but it's a really nice example of a project that's involving many different reserves. And so they're looking at a particular adaptation strategy to try to help protect coastal wetlands, that are really vulnerable to sea level rise. And so when this project began a few years ago, there was a lot of questions about this thin layer sediment placement strategy and when and how and under what conditions could it work and could it be used well. So this team has got their core research activity is a replicated restoration experiment across 8 different reserves. And it's really capitalizing on the power and the capacity of the reserve network, which is neat. They're thinking hard about a few different tiers of users. They've got users within the reserve system because some of the reserves do restoration work within and just outside of their boundaries. And then they've got a tier, another tier of users, including folks who are involved in permitting for these big projects, folks within federal agencies and state agencies. And so they put together an advisory committee of those of those end users to provide input throughout. And then they've got even a broader tier of potential users who don't necessarily have the time to be involved in any sort of committees, but they were heavily consulted at the very beginning through a needs assessment, and now they're going back to those users as the project is wrapping up to really share, early drafts and then final drafts of their products. And then this is another example of a project where the reserves are, the lead scientists as well on the project, and then they've got some external partners as well, both within the research team as well as on that advisory committee. So another example there of how a project is defining their end users and how they're thinking about their collaborative approach. So my very last thing I'm going to just put up here is just a few other resources for you as you're thinking about developing your pre-proposal, and then we'll open it up for questions. So on our website where the RFP is available, there's a few other resources linked there, including the one on the sticky note there, a pre-proposal tips tool. Last year, we spent a fair amount of time looking back at our last few years of RFPs and calling out all of the common feedback that reviewers provided on their pre-proposals, and we distilled that down into what we call a pre-proposal tips tool. So we really encourage you to check that out. You can even use it as a little bit of a checklist to make sure you're kind of hitting all the key points as you're developing your pre-proposal. And then there's a few other resources there online, some things to help you think carefully about who your users are and what their needs are, kind of really reflect on what the right way might be to involve each of those individuals to really customize your collaborative approach. And then poke around on our website. There's a really nice catalog of all the projects that have been funded over the last 10 years, actually. And then we run a webinar series. So if you're not already on our mailing list, or we encourage you to check those out. It's a nice way to just learn about some of the projects, and there's actually videos and slide decks and things from those webinars too that could help you just get a sense for what different approaches and what different styles projects use to do this collaborative science stuff well. So I think I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Jen to field questions and make sure we get good answers to questions. So please go ahead and put questions into the console, and Nick and Jen and I will be organizing those and responding as best we can.
So thank you for all that information. I think it's helpful, and I'm sure people are digesting everything you shared. So I think we have our first question here. It looks like the question is whether reserve is limited to serving as a lead reserve on a single project during the pre-proposal stage. That's a great question. So we do, as many of you have seen, have secondary selection criteria. That's for when we get down to selecting the projects we're going to support. But at this stage of developing pre-proposals and even submitting full proposals, you are not limited to only one, working on one project. And also note that when we are selecting, we have modified secondary selection criteria this year for those of you who are familiar with how it went last year. And we will be able, a reserve will be able to lead a project that involves just their reserve, as well as a project that involves 3 or more reserves. So each reserve has the opportunity to be selected to lead 2 projects in the collaborative research opportunity, one for your own reserve and then one that would be for multiple reserves. At this stage, there's no limitations. If you've got a lot of great ideas and you have the time and energy to work on them, submit them. Another great question here. There's an emerging issue that wasn't listed as a management need. Is this going to be an issue for you as a submitting team? So that's something else that we've recognized, that in the past, when we have, we collect, or NOAA collects the reserve management needs in the summer, things happen over time and ideas and opportunities emerge. And so you do have the chance to submit a proposal that might not be on the reserve management list or might not be directly on the reserve management list. But it's really important then that you have a letter from the reserve that indicates that that's a management need. So it's like a user letter that indicates it's a management need, and that you're really clear in the section of your pre-proposal how that's a management need for the reserve. So get it into the narrative and get a letter from the reserve itself stating that that meets their need, one of their needs. Another great question here. Do you recommend that a proposal covers only one of the focus areas? Or if it overlaps with more than one focus area, can you highlight multiple ones? I'm gonna ask for a bit of help from Lynn on this because I can't remember if you have to pick one focus area or not. I know you need to pick one lead reserve, but I don't believe you're required to pick a single focus area.
No, I mean, we do ask that you reference it and show how it lines up with the focus areas, but no, and we totally understand that, you know, some of the reserve management needs cut across focus areas, and that's totally appropriate.
Yeah, and there's no advantage one way or the other. Just write your proposal, your narrative, to make it as clear as possible what it is you're doing. So, as Lynn said, sometimes that cuts across multiple ones. Okay, we have a question that is about the Hudson River estuary, but actually could apply to several other reserves that are multi-component reserves. And the question is whether it's better to narrow the research areas to the component sites, or could the project include the larger estuarine or river system? And I think from our perspective, working with the reserve and identifying what is the right sort of geography for the project, for that research project that meets the needs of the reserve is the right approach. So it's hard to say until you really work it out with the reserve and know that the approach you're taking is going to meet the needs of the reserve.
I'm going to read off the next question for you, Jen.
Yeah, that would be great.
So if multiple reserves are involved, plus university and state and local partners, how do you prioritize the 3 letters of support from end users? Can you include more reserves without getting a letter from all?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first we want to make sure that we're talking all about end users. So the university's in there and they may or may not be a user. So focusing in on being limited to 3 letters. One way to do that is have multiple users sign a single letter. So for users who have a similar, they're going to use the results in a similar way, you could imagine having a letter that multiple people sign off on. Reserves might logically be that multi-signatory letter, but they may not be. It might be a reserve and the users in their particular area or the partners in their particular area. But you have the option of having multiple entities sign a single letter. And if I were doing it, that's probably what I would do. Len, do you have any thoughts on that?
And I think the other sort of question I see in this, sort of embedded within this question is, you know, your reserves partners can be named on a proposal without having a letter of support from them. You know, the letter of support is really from an end user. And if your reserve partners are, you know, a key member of the science team helping conduct the work, maybe they're part of the budget, you may not need a letter of support from them. That's not a requirement that there be a letter from the reserve system as part of your proposal. In part because we've got a whole bunch of ways of confirming that the proposal does, you know, line up tightly with the reserve needs. And the letter of support is really just for end users.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it might have been one of the earlier questions where we talked about emerging issues, where it's important to have that, confirmation from the reserve that you would want in that case, particularly to have a reserve sign a letter, but it's not a requirement. That was a good catch. Thank you, Lynn. We have another question.
Yeah, it's actually it's a nice related question actually. Can an end user be a state agency rather than a reserve partner? Do you want to tackle that one?
So can a state agency, let me see if can a state agency be an end user? And it doesn't have to be. So yes, that was a great question. And that is, the answer is the end user is, I don't know if you remember Lynn's definition, but it's that entity or organization that's in place to use the results from the research. So if it's the state agency who's in, like a regulatory agency, for example, who's in position to take that research in and amend the regulatory approach, the reserve, of course, is not a regulatory agency, then yes, it's entirely appropriate for an agency to be the user and not necessarily the reserve. Just remember, collaborate closely with the reserve where you're doing that work so that they are part of the process. Anything to add to that, Lynn? That makes sense to you?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. And it's appropriate to think of the reserve system as perhaps one of your users, but there may be others that are your primary user, and therefore they're the focus of the proposal, and those are the ones that are elevated in perhaps the letters of support.
Yeah.
Another question here. I noticed that both example projects included significant field components. Is this typical of projects funded through this program? Yeah, it was an interesting observation. And it may just be those are the two projects that looked like nice kind of tidy examples to share and offered some diversity, but no, and I'll turn it over to you, Jen, but I would just say that one of our focus areas actually is projects that look at existing monitoring data and develop that into some different applications, syntheses for different applications. And absolutely, we do want to make sure that we've got space for projects that have a variety of different research approaches and different research methods, whether that's syntheses or social science projects.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add a ton more to that, Lynn. I think it's important to point that out, particularly that natural and physical sciences were maybe highlighted in the presentation, but social science is definitely a place that we're looking to support projects, and we're very open to those kinds of proposals, and as well as projects that in particular, I think, look to the system-wide monitoring program, which is, for those of you who are new to the system, we might say SWAMP, but sort of take advantage of that long-term data sets to, do some kind of analyses, develop a tool or something else that can provide and meet management needs that way. So you don't have to just do field work.
We've got another question here. Could a science transfer grant be repeated? Which is, if it moved to one reserve, can it move to another?
So that's a great question. It's not necessarily related to collaborative research, but more to the other RFP that's open right now, the science transfer opportunity. And I think that might be one that we want to talk to our program officer about, and maybe get back to whoever asked this. In fact, what we'll probably do is add that to the Q&A, running Q&A for the science transfer opportunity. I know that we've supported different aspects of transfer and related topics, but the idea of maybe doing exactly the same thing another time, we want to take that up with NOAA. So send me or Lynn an email and just connect with us so we make sure you get your response, and then we will also add it to the running Q&A for that science transfer RFP.
In the chat, I just pushed the URL for the grant page. If you want to follow up and check out any of those references that we talked about, the summary of the review process, the management needs document from the reserve system. There's a running Q&A record there as well that we'll be updating at the end of today.
And all the tools that you mentioned too, Lynn, are all there, and those are great things to just look through quickly and see if there's some tips or whatever that might be helpful in putting together this kind of proposal. It's a little bit different than other types of proposals. So it's worth checking out some of those tools we've developed to help folks with that.